this Bago-style plain talk program. Um, Tonight, I want to focus on the subject called the Dutch disease. It's a very kind of strange name. However, it's an economic phenomenon, and I will shortly ask the producer to play a little clip that would seek to explain this thing called the Dutch disease that has bedeviled Trinidad and Tobago, the economic space of Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension, Tobago, and dispel the myth that seems to pervade Tobago that if we are able to get the oil and gas in the waters of Tobago, that will make Tobago rich, and that Tobago will prosper because we get the oil and gas that are in our waters. So I want to dispel that myth tonight and explain to Tobagonians that Venezuela has the largest oil deposits in the world, and the Venezuelans are leaving Venezuela and going all over the world for shelter. Nigeria, loads of oil deposits, and Nigeria is a relatively poor country to what it could be. You have many other countries that are blessed with natural resources that don't prosper. And if you come closer to home, we have had 2 oil booms, 2 gas booms, 2 oil booms, 2 gas booms, and I guess probably some booms in between that. And where are we in Trinidad and Tobago? Are we really better off for having those gas booms compared to countries like the Nordic countries where you have limited natural resources? Country like Singapore, where you have close to zero natural resources. And a country, for example, like Singapore, where they were actually kicked out of the union with Malaysia. They weren't allowed 4% like we are receiving from Trinidad, or 4.9% or whatever percent you want to call it. They were kicked out of the union and they had to find a way. And Singapore is now one of the leading economic lights in the world. So I want to debunk the myth tonight that exercising this or having this oil and gas in Tobago waters, that is going to make Tobago rich. It will not make Tobago rich unless and until we are able to put in place good governance. And I want to deal with the aspect of good governance tonight when I want to deal with this idea of the what I will call that fiasco at Festivals Commission, where we have this situation where Secretary is telling us that we, the taxpayers, can't know who we are spending $9.3 million on to assist us with promoting some fed somewhere. And I'm saying that maybe if you had 90 million available to the Tobago Festivals Commission, maybe they might have had a bigger fete. The point is, more money does not necessarily mean a better, a more robust economy. It requires good corporate governance. And I'm saying the structures, the corporate governance structures in Trinidad and in Tobago as well, are weak, very weak, to the point where a secretary can stand in the House and say to the House, the Tobago House of Assembly, that I will not tell you who I'm spending this money on. And this is just symptomatic of when you receive additional resources, the possibilities that could occur. And you will hear from the clip, because I don't want to be too opinionated, but you will hear from the clip the evolution of this thing called the Dutch disease, how it works, and you'll have a better understanding of what I'm saying. So at this point, producer, can you roll the clip on the Dutch disease, please?
Economics. You would think that the discovery and exploitation of natural resources would only lead to prosperity, but it can be a curse that brings a lot of negative results. Dutch disease is a paradox whereby the discovery of natural resources negatively impacts a country's economy. When a country exports natural resources, the money that is paid is called export revenue. The more exports a country has, the more revenue it makes, and the more that country's currency is likely to appreciate. This currency appreciation is driven by several factors, including more demand for the currency, which strengthens the value versus other currencies. The country may begin to export more than it imports, leading to more foreign currency being exchanged for the local currency. Foreign investors will be attracted to the country to invest their foreign currency after first exchanging it for the domestic currency. You also have speculators engaging in currency trading in the hope of making a quick profit. All of these factors result in currency appreciation. While currency appreciation makes imported goods and services cheaper, it makes domestic goods and services more expensive for foreign consumers. A strong currency is bad for exports because it makes the exports more expensive for other countries to purchase and import. Domestic manufacturing and agriculture become less competitive because it is more costly for other countries to purchase them. These sectors will begin to shrink and support less employees. The workers from these shrinking sectors may be drawn to the resource sectors in a phenomenon called sectoral reallocation. The resource sector will begin to hinder the development of other sectors as the economy becomes overly reliant on natural resources. A country's industries and sectors will become less diversified and more economically vulnerable. Many oil exporting countries are left scrambling.
So, the introduction to the clip explains the fact that the Trinidad and Tobago currency is, in my mind, and I'm sure in the mind of the economists, overvalued. And it's the reason that we have the foreign exchange shortage. And it explains the whole idea of the dissemination of this, or the destruction of the agriculture sector, and the weakness of the manufacturing sector as against foreign imported products. And the clip explains this clearly so that we understand that, take for instance in the case of Tobago, where we are trying to advance the agriculture agenda, we are trying to advance the manufacturing agenda, and you have, in that case, where we are able to garner the oil and gas in our waters, we need to be mindful that it will affect those sectors and the productivity of those sectors and the ability of those sectors to compete internationally, so that the idea that all our problems will be solved when we garner this oil and gas in our waters is in my mind a myth, unless we manage these resources, unless we are prepared to have the kind of corporate governance structures in place that will allow us to get the benefit out of it. Producer, you could continue.
Price of oil drops. Many oil exporting countries are left scrambling. Another issue is the growth of the service sector. Increases in wealth leads to increased spending on the service sector. The real wages of workers in the economy will rise, which increases the cost for manufacturing firms to employ workers. Increased labor costs for the manufacturing sector further decrease their competitiveness versus other countries when it comes to exports. Consider how the United States is largely a service-based economy. The high wages that manufacturing workers demand versus their peers in other countries means American manufacturing is uncompetitive when compared to the relatively low wages in Asian countries like China and Vietnam. Natural resource exploitation leads to income inequality as the enormous wealth and benefits are concentrated in the hands of the few. While it is true that there will be higher wages and the service sector will grow, this pales in comparison to the enormous wealth that is concentrated in the hands of just a few billionaires. Often, natural resources are exploited by foreign multinationals, whereby the wealth is taken out of the country. The output of natural resources leads to substantial tax revenues for the government. The government then tends to spend more on public services and entitlement programs. Over time, the government will likely cut other taxes and become overly reliant on oil tax revenues. What happens when the oil price prices crash or the supply dries up and the country can no longer afford its generous benefit programs, government spending will have to be curtailed, whereby taxes are either raised and or expenditures are reduced. This will lead to political and civil turmoil and unrest. There are ways to mitigate Dutch disease. A stabilization fund can be established that saves excess resources.
What the second part of that clip seeks to explain, I heard our Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley, making pains, I think it might have been at a political meeting, to warn us that the Dragon Gas deal must be done if Trinidad and Tobago is to survive, because there's no gas for the trains in Point Lisas. We don't produce oil anymore. And it is clear to me, and I'm sure it is clear to those who study the economic phenomenon and understand finance, that Trinidad and Tobago is in dire straits in terms of where we are with our economy. And it hinges on this idea that we have, which is another myth, another issue I'd want to raise. This idea that a percentage of the budget is okay for us to make our way forward. Because, I take pains to say that 10% of 1,000 is but $100, but 10% of 100 is $10. And if we are able to carve out a 10% of the budget, but the budget, but our revenues fall by half, then we have virtually lost any gains we think we might have made by getting 10% rather than 4%. The point I'm making is we need to be careful with this idea about a percentage, and even more careful with this idea about a percentage based on population size. I think it's a bad variable that has been used, and we need to improve on that variable. Otherwise, it makes no sense. So if the birth rate in Trinidad increases, what does it mean? Less resources for Tobago? I think it's a very crude variable to use, and it's being bandied about as a variable that should be used. This population size, more needs to be done. We need to engage the economists around who would probably be able to give us better variables that will give us better indicators of where we should be in terms of the funding. And I think more important is the fiscal space that would allow us to make the kind of investments that we need to make. And in the next program, hopefully I'll be able to go into a number of the economic possibilities outside of oil and gas that Tobago can engage in that will allow us to move forward positively without this kind of dependence on a 4% or 10% from Trinidad. I would like to see Tobago project that by 2040, we don't need a percentage from Trinidad, that we are able to, this idea about self-determination, you can't have self-determination without economic ability to pay your way. So these ideas about self-determination must be hinged on our ability to pay our way. And I'm saying that I think we have the kind of assets in the Tobago space that would allow us to pay our way if we mobilize them properly, if we have the kind of corporate governance structures that we should have to allow us to be able to be self-determined in a clear economic way rather than self-determination on paper, and that idea about being able to determine self without, the local cliche, you have whiskey taste and mobby pocket. So we have to get to the point where we focus the mind on what we need to do, and this program will certainly look at some of those possibilities, because I'm not here just to critique. I'm here also to provide some solutions, some ideas as to how we can, change our circumstances. Producer?
Fund can be established that saves excess resource revenue for future use. Revenues from exploiting natural resources can be invested into infrastructure and education, which promotes economic diversification. Governments should implement prudent fiscal and monetary policy to manage the appreciation of their currency. However, what usually happens is that the countries with abundant natural resources end up with corrupt and inept governments that squander the wealth instead of investing it for the day when the natural resources are no longer available. When the natural resources like oil dry up and no longer provide reliable income, the country is left with a small and weak manufacturing export sector that is likely fallen far behind its peers in the rest of the world. It will take many years to catch up with the manufacturing sector in the rest of the world, if ever. In 1959, vast natural gas deposits were discovered in the North Sea, which led to the rapid creation of wealth from oil exports. As the Netherlands exported oil, what followed was an influx of foreign currency, increasing demand for the guilder, strengthening it. The value of Dutch currency rapidly rose, which made all non-oil exports uncompetitive in the world market. Another issue is that gas and oil extraction and processing is capital intensive. It generates few jobs. Unemployment spiked from 1.1% in 1970 to 5.1% in 1977.
So, I'm hopeful that the clip has helped an understanding of this concept, this economic phenomenon called the Dutch disease, which has bedeviled Trinidad and Tobago, and I dare say Tobago by extension, because we wait on the returns from oil and gas in order to quibble and argue for 4% or 4.9% or 4.69%. And it's basically the Dutch disease, probably on steroids in the Tobago case, because we are waiting on the resources from Trinidad to do what we must to improve our circumstances here in Tobago. So I trust that the clip and my narration along with the clip would help us to dispel that notion of those political commentators who would wish to have us believe that if we are able to get 10 nautical miles out in the sea and we are able to garner that oil and gas that is out there, that it is going to make life better in Tobago. It has not made life better in Trinidad and Tobago. Last year we had over 600 murders. Life has become, according to statements Dr. Joe would make, brutish, nasty, and short. And Tobago has not been spared. And recent pronouncements about the number of gangs in Tobago only reinforce that idea, reinforce that reality that all is not well in the island of Tobago, and we must do what we must in order to move Tobago forward. Part of my discourse for the weeks I would be here would be to address this whole issue of the importance of human capital development in Tobago, which is where I think the focus ought to be placed so that we can move Tobago forward. Our pass rates at sea, our pass rates at Cape are woefully inadequate to meet the needs of a developed Tobago, and we need to focus the mind on our human capital development. And I am going to proffer a slew of ideas around human capital development that must begin with, and I'm not blaming here at all, but it must begin with, that whole education ecosystem that we need to improve to improve the understanding of maths and English, which are the currencies for international trade and for development. I'm a bit concerned about this idea about something called a Bago-centric curriculum. I don't know what that really means. But if you are competing in the international, with the international world, I think we need English and math. We need science. We need our children to be competent in the areas of STEM. And this idea about Bago-centric curriculum, I wait to hear what this curriculum is about that would advance the Tobago education agenda, because education, and not education in narrow sense of a university degree, but education in the true sense of a skills development in Tobago. We have the Scarborough Junior Secondary School. In my mind, that school ought to be converted into the Scarborough Secondary School for Construction and Technology. And those children that are so inclined, they go there from Form 1. And we introduce a STEM program there that allows them to learn their trade, learn their skill, and be able to be good tradesmen, tradesmen that can help us build out the infrastructure in Tobago, rather than shunting all of them into this school system that is based on growth. We need skilled people to do the work in Tobago as well, and we need to address how we administer education across the board. This wholesale kind of education that means you must all go to university is not the kind of structure we need to set up. And the truth is, we are in charge of education, including curriculum, in Tobago here, and therefore we must address this curriculum issue, this education issue. And the school that is to be constructed at Bacalet, rather than have a school there that is going to be just another secondary school, we turn it into a sport and sport management school where children who are inclined to sport with a good STEM program go to that school from Form 1. So we channel them where their energies, where their passions, where their skills lie. I don't think you have a better known Tobagonian than Dwight York. And Dwight York ostensibly excellent footballer. And the point I'm making is, I'm sure Dwight York probably has made more money than most of us. As a footballer, the point I'm making is we put people into the areas where their skill set allow them to thrive and to become the best in the world. Dwight York played for Manchester United. And I'm saying, I am sure we have more Dwight Yorks here. Going to school, there were many runners around. Tobago has a lot of sports persons, and they seem to fritter away somewhere between secondary school. We need a school, a specialized school that allows sports persons to develop and grow and to be able to, beat international competitors, because we are focused on developing our sports agenda. So I'm saying, we need to look at this human capital development program in a serious way that allows Tobago to start to grow and thrive. And this focus on the Dutch, this focus on natural gas and oil, we need to debunk this myth so that we begin to focus on how we can develop this island in a serious way without this this myth hovering over us. So, we on this program, hopefully, I will be able to speak a bit more on a number of the initiatives for how we can move, the island forward. At this point, I might just want to raise, one such project, although tonight is not about that. I've been talking about this idea about a housing a housing boom in Tobago, building houses for Tobagonians. And, I listened to the Secretary for Housing at pains telling us that there isn't enough money to build houses for Tobagonians in Tobago. And I'm saying that I don't concur with that view. I think the view is a short-sighted one. I think what we need to do is to begin to think outside the box as to how we can build home for Tobagonians without depending on Trinidad. And I'm saying there's a way it can be done. And, I want to explain a bit more about how we can have this housing trust done. I mean, the Mount Pleasant experience tells us that you don't need money from Trinidad to build homes. Homes were built in Mount Pleasant without money from Trinidad. And there are a few other examples. I mean, in Trinidad, you had at the time of the Dupree Empire, they were building homes without money from the state. So there isn't a requirement for money from Trinidad to build homes in Tobago. If you think sufficiently about the problem, there's a way we can address it that allows us to build homes. And if we also attach to that this skills program that I'm suggesting through the Scarborough Junior Secondary School for Construction and Construction Technology, we would have the kind of builders that would allow us to be able to build out the infrastructure that we need in Tobago. So for me, there are a number of possibilities that are not linked to this idea that we need money from Trinidad to do it. So, I trust and I hope that, we here in Tobago will focus the mind on what we can control. And there are a lot of levers that we can control in the Tobago space that would allow the economy of Tobago to grow. And, I think ad nauseum this idea of Trinidad not giving us enough money. While that might be so, I'm saying we in Tobago here need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and begin to focus the mind on what we can do here, what we have control over. We do have control over a lot of levers that we can use to improve our economic circumstances. Good night again, Tobago. Moving on at this point to discuss, so part of my program would be to focus on topical issues that have taken place in the past week that we should pay attention to and discuss those issues dispassionately so that we can move the Tobago development trajectory forward. And one of those issues that I am quite peeved about is the issue of the lack of accountability, and the lack of accountability by the boards in general in the Tobago space. And the comments by the Secretary for Tourism brings clearly to mind the issue of accountability, or the lack thereof, of the boards in Tobago. I constantly listen to the contributions being made by a number of secretaries, speaking of TADCO, of all the money that they are making from selling fish. I hear about Studley Park, and you hear about Festivals Commission. And I'm saying the experience of if we go back to when the NER had to divest a number of these state enterprises because they were a drain on the treasury, seems to be a concern that we must now pay attention to. And the comments last week by the Secretary for Tourism that we cannot know, or we should not know, who the THA is investing $9.3 million with, I think is an affront to any kind of democratic institutional governance structures that, I really am flabbergasted by the comments. And it's not just the comments, there is a lack of understanding of corporate governance and how you behave with public money. And to go in the house and make those kinds of announcements tells me that there is no concern about accountability for public money. And I am constantly drawn to this. There is a manual called the State Enterprises Performance and Monitoring Manual that is used, or I don't even think it's probably well used, even in the Trinidad space, but it points to the things you do on state boards to make state boards accountable to the public, accountable to us who are the true shareholders of these state entities. And one of the things we need to be reminded about in that manual, and I guess they might say that that manual is for Trinidad state boards and not Tobago state boards. But the question I would ask is, where's the manual for the Tobago state boards that allow them to be accountable, to us here in Tobago? And I'm saying that State Enterprises Performance Manual speaks to the whole idea about annual reports, audited annual reports. And I'm saying that we have had administrations before, and we have the current administration where state boards are not producing any audited reports. We don't know how much they are spending. We don't have a clue as to what is going on in those agencies that are utilizing public funds. Yet we say we don't have enough money. How much money is enough when you are not accounting to us for what you are doing with the resources that you currently have? And I'm saying some serious attention must be paid in the Tobago space to the accountability of these state boards that seem to just be on their own, doing their own thing with our money. And to say in the house that you are not going to account. And I want to go to the specific kind of response to say that the agency is an independent agency, and therefore to find out who this promoter is infringing on the independence of the agency. Now, that in any language makes no sense, because the truth is, the secretary, the board is accountable to the secretary. And if the accountability systems work as they should, once the board minutes are confirmed, it should go to the secretary. And therefore, the secretary ought to be apprised of who this promoter is. If the board agreed that some promoter would be given that kind of money to conduct a promotion. And I'm saying the secretary must know. And to go to the house and say that you do not know, it's an affront in my mind. It shows a disdain for accountability, and it's not only now, it has been happening prior. And I'm saying that we here in Tobago, I can remember Mr. Hochul Charles, making a statement, and I think it's worthwhile repeating it here now, that sometimes, when you hear the chicken hawk crying, don't feel sorry for the chicken hawk. He said you need to sometimes be worried about your chickens on the ground, because what the chicken hawk is trying to do is to lure you away from focusing on the chickens so that it could swoop down and take them up. And I say that in the context of this quibbling about the lack of resources might just be to lure us away from what is actually happening with the resources on the ground. And I'm saying that we need accountability from these state enterprises. And I'm saying that, the entity called the Tobago Festivals Commission, the board must say to us, whether or not these minutes are going to the secretary, and whether or not, the secretary is just not saying to us that, and something has to be said. It cannot be that a board functions in that way without reporting to the secretary. And I doubt that it occurs, but if it does, I think it needs to be remedied so that we can have the kind of accountability in the Tobago space to ensure that our monies are well spent. I mean, we have had enough of that kind of spending on the jazzes before. We have had serious looks at what went on with the jazz prior, and a lot of recommendations were made, and we seem to be making the same mistakes over and over without any correction at all. And I'm saying that this is but one case, but I'm saying as well that there are many other cases of these state boards that exist in the Tobago space that do not account for us, do not account to us, but are spending our resources daily, spending our resources in ways that we do not know, spending resources in ways that we might not wish them to spend. And there is a total lack of accountability. I want to link that back to this whole idea of the Dutch disease, and to say that, if this is the kind of lack of accountability that takes place with 4.6% of the budget, what do we expect to occur if you get 6%? What do you expect to occur if you get 10% of the budget? Would the governance structures improve? Would the accountability improve? And I rather doubt they would improve. So I'm saying, we as, the populace in Tobago, we must argue for, we must insist upon better corporate governance. We need to have some rules and regulations that govern how these state boards operate. We need to have a look at them again, just as, when you had to divest these entities when we did not have money, we had to go to the IMF. We have to take another look at these entities, whether or not they really make sense in any kind of existence, and decide what we do with them. But certainly accountability is par the course and necessary for us to think about what we might want to do with these entities. And I want to urge the Secretary of Tourism, I want to urge the secretaries in the Tobago space to insist on accountability, so that the monies that we receive can be better spent and that Tobago can better benefit from. the resources that comes to Tobago. And so that issue of that issue of payment to a promoter or whoever the promoter is, I'm saying we need transparency in it. We must get transparency. We will insist on transparency. In fact, we have these levers called the freedom of information, and we must use them. This talk show will use them to provide you with the information that we need to know, that we need to have, so that we can assess what is going on with our resources, because it cannot be business as usual. We as the taxpayers have to insist upon accountability, because slavery is not about black or white. Slavery is about ignorance and not knowing, and we cannot sit and allow situations to continue where we do not know what is happening and we accept that as party course. So I urge Tobagonians, wherever you are, to raise your voices in concert that we do not agree with this kind of approach to spending our money. It is our money. Yes, so we do not agree with this approach to spending our money, and that we need more accountability. We need more accountability from the state boards. We need to have a set of rules that govern how they operate, and we need to know what is happening. We need more accountability from the state boards, because as I indicated before, this is probably just a tip of the iceberg, because we are not sure what happens with all the other state agencies, because I don't know of the reports that they provide. In fact, one of the requirements under the State Enterprises Performance Manual is that you're supposed to have a public, you're supposed to have the opportunity for the public to be notified, to come and sit and listen to. You're supposed to publish these things in the newspapers, in the daily newspapers, so that we can see what the accounts look like. None of these things occur. So we just have state enterprises functioning in the Tobago space. We don't know what they're doing. We don't know how they're spending our money. It cannot be It cannot be allowed to continue, and we must insist as Tobagonians that accountability must come. So tonight I just want to wrap by saying, look, the Dutch disease dispels the myth that we can exist in Tobago if we have access to oil and gas, and that will make us the richest island on the planet, or that we can exist in a system of a lack of accountability by our state boards, by our secretaries indicating that our state boards are independent, which they aren't, and therefore they do not need to account us. I want to thank you tonight for allowing me into your homes, into your rooms, and for listening. And I trust that you will be back with me next week, and you will share the life, share the life, share the life.
See what the Lord has done. Can you see what the Lord has done? What we waited for has come to pass. See what the Lord has done. On your wedding day, you're gonna sing that. Can you see what the Lord has done? When you walk into that property, can you see what the Lord has? When that healing happens, what we've been